Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you may be watching this. I am Jamie Moeller, and this is the Grad Connection, where my whole goal is to try to help you do more than survive. I want to see you thrive. We've been in the middle of this research series. I don't know how many weeks we're going on. We are starting to come to probably what I think will be the end of it. But I still have a few topics that I think are worthwhile talking about, probably about 5 or 6. So we'll continue down this thread just for completeness. So today, what I want to talk about is copyright considerations, particularly as it relates to theses and dissertations and the work that a graduate student would do. But I think there are probably broader implications for this as well. So first and foremost, copyright is a legal property right that is attached to original works of creativity. So it is a legal law-oriented thing. It does protect creative works, and there's about a category. I think there's about 8 different categories of creative works. Some works can be much more complex to deal with. Oftentimes when graduate students are working, you're dealing with images from papers and other sources. And I would note to you that you can't just, in your thesis or dissertation or even works that you publish, you can't just take an image and reuse it with the idea that it's okay to do so. I mean, permissions are required. We'll talk a little bit about that. But there's a list of, there are literary works, there's images, there are broadcasts. Audio and video recordings can be incredibly cumbersome because there are multiple layers oftentimes to the rights associated with those. But nevertheless, and even some things that you wouldn't think are copyrightable, like tests, for example, or exams or surveys, maps. So there's a broad swath of things that would be considered a creative work. The thing that I would say is that it protects the expression of the idea, not the idea itself. So if I came up with the idea of if I was going to create an image of a 40 Ford, and that specific image I create is copyrightable, but the idea of an image of a 40 Ford positioned in a certain way or whatever, that is not copyrightable. So it is the expression of the idea. Another concept associated with this is kind of understanding that a copyright is assigned or exists from the day of creation by the author. Now, the challenge to that is understanding that depending on certain circumstances, the author can be different things. If you're creating something independently of any position, any job, any contract, any of those kinds of things, you are obviously the author as an individual. If you work for a company, typically if those works are associated with your job, or they're part of the scope of the duties of your job, then your company may actually own them as opposed to you. And then further, if you're let's say you're doing freelance work or work for hire or consulting kinds of work, who owns the copyright on a particular thing created would depend upon what's actually written in the contract. As a person who's done freelance work in the past, if I were creating something and giving away all the rights to it as well, then I'm going to charge more money for said thing, right? Because I'm surrendering all rights to it. So those are kind of the initial kind of my outlay of what a copyright is. Another thing to understand is that copyright is more than one thing. That's why sometimes you'll see copyright 2022 all rights plural reserved, because there are actually 5 rights that are protected, and you can give away certain of the rights and retain certain of the rights. And that's what's important, at least in my mind as a scholar. It's important that you don't give away all of the rights to the works, particularly scholarly works that you create. So there are 5 rights. There is the right of first publication, that is the right to publish something the first time, right? Second would be duplication rights, that is to be able to make copies. Distribution rights, not just to be able to make copies, but also to give those out, either for fee or for free. Derivative rights, that is to take the original work and create something that's based upon it. And then the last would be public performance and display rights, which is the ability to stand up and either show it to an audience or to talk about it. So public performance and display. So right of first publication, duplication, distribution, derivative rights, and public performance and display. Now, the critical thing for you as a scholar, as an author, is to make sure, typically, if you're going to publish a journal article or a conference article, you have to give them the right of first publication. You have to give them the right to duplicate it, and you have to give them the right to distribute it. What you don't want to give away are derivative rights and public performance display rights. Because by doing so, what you can do is create a situation in which you actually have to ask for permission to use your own stuff. Where this really becomes important is some doctoral students, as far as their dissertation is concerned, the dissertation may be based upon articles that they've published previously. So in what I would call a contemporary or an article-based dissertation, which is common in a lot of fields and becoming even more common in others, chapters 2 through N are articles that you've already published. And if you want to include those in your dissertation as part of your dissertation, then you don't want to give away derivative rights or public performance and display rights, because the dissertation in that particular situation would be a derivative, right? So there are ways in which, I would encourage you, a lot of times the challenge is we all get excited when we finally get something accepted for publication, and we're so excited we may not really pay a whole lot of attention to the legalese that we sign when we're doing kind of the final sign-off of the authorship, but you do want to pay attention to that. Now, I will say more and more journals, conferences, so forth, are recognizing the desire for authors to retain derivative rights, public performance, display rights. And so more and more of the contracts are written such that it really allows that to remain. One of the things that typically if you see like Creative Commons licensing, that oftentimes is a good sign, because that probably means that you're not giving away everything to the journal or conference. If you don't see Creative Commons there, then you're going to want to pay attention and pay a little more close attention to the rights that you're signing away. And essentially as I talk about this, it's like if you think in the olden days when everything was published in a traditional print form before the interweb, essentially the publishing model was you gave away all your rights, publishing houses would publish that, and then they'd turn around and sell it back to your institution. Because that's kind of a parasitic way to live. There has been something called the open access scholarship movement. Lots of different terms could be used for this, but basically it's the idea that it's open access publishing, where you're not giving away all of your rights. You're still being able to publish, but you're not giving away all your rights. So make sure you're kind of paying attention to licensing, make sure you're paying attention to the legal documents that sign off on before you publish an article. Now, a couple other thoughts that I have about copyrights. First of all, copyrights are not a foolproof mechanism. As an individual, it can be really hard to leverage a copyright if you're infringed upon. The challenge with copyrights is they're not validated legally ahead of time, right? So, like a patent or a trademark, patents protect ideas, trademarks protect identities like logos or slogans. Those two things, before you get the patent or you get the trademark, a lawyer has to do a patent search, a trademark search, and you have to go through a legal process that validates that trademark or patent before it's granted. With a copyright, the moment you create something, you can call it copyrighted. You don't even have to legally, register it with the U.S. government or anything. You can just say, and you can even just put a copyright mark on it, copyright 2020, all rights reserved, and that shows intent to copyright. But it's not validated until somebody infringes upon it and you take them to court. And this is where, as an individual, it can actually be really difficult to protect things because copyright is not a very strong vehicle. Now, it's a double-edged sword. You would say, am I advocating putting a legal process on the front end? Well, that would help with validity, but that's also going to add cost, right? Patents and trademarks can cost as little as $1,500 and all the way up to, you name the number. So just recognize as an individual, it can be difficult to protect things through the copyright vehicle. I'm not saying that you shouldn't attempt it, but just recognize that in times, number one, it may cost you to be able to protect your work in the long run. And second, you may actually go through the legal process and it may not even be a valid copyright for a variety of reasons. So that's kind of the risk. I would say, if you have something that you really want to protect, then I would probably get some legal advice and legal help to make sure that you do go through a little bit of a legal process on the front end to make sure it's fully and properly protected. validated on the front end mostly. Copyright length. So as individual authors, it's basically the author's life plus 70 years. If it's a corporate work, if memory serves me correctly, it's like the lesser of either 95 years or 120. I can't remember, but it works a little bit differently if it's corporate work. As a graduate student, as someone who might end up wanting to become a researcher either at an academic institution or even in research and R&D in a business setting, a couple other things I want to make note of. Make sure you take a look at the institutional policies wherever you go to work. Obviously, if you're working in business and industry as a researcher, there may be more stringent policies about, pretty much everything you create may end up being owned or owned by the company. So recognize that. Even in academia, though, I would say you have to look at it because there's a lot of variation of policies from institution to institution. Most institutions, academic ones that I can speak to, most of them will separate scholarly works, journals, conferences, monographs, books, that kind of thing, theses, dissertations, from educational works, that is like PowerPoints and things that you would create for the classroom. Purdue, where I'm at, they certainly bifurcate those two things, and they have different approaches to both of them. So just make sure you're looking at, oftentimes when we talk to students when they graduate about getting jobs, we say, look at total compensation, look at all your benefits, look at your salary, look at all those things. I would add on to that, to those who are going to do research for a living, also look at what kinds of hooks the place that you're going to work at might have in you as far as restrictions on what you can publish or how, what you own or not. Future hooks, that is, are you under non-disclosure such that you can't actually pursue another position or that line of research if you were to go somewhere else? So look at the entire thing, because oftentimes, just like I said earlier, we get excited about publications and then don't look at the legalese that we sign away. Oftentimes people will take a position and they don't look at all aspects of the position. They just get excited that they've got a new job, and they may just look at the salary and direct compensation that's traditional. There went a light, so I'm not going to turn that back on, but hopefully I would encourage you to look at that entire picture. I guess the last thing that I would say for graduate students, particularly as you're working on your thesis and dissertation, anything, any image, anything that is not created by you, particularly images, but it can go beyond images, anything that's not created by you, try to get permissions as you go along. Don't wait until your last semester when you're trying to finish up your degree and deposit your thesis or dissertation. Try to get permissions ahead of time. And oftentimes with theses and dissertations, it's a matter of contacting the author, and they may forward you on to someone who represents them or can provide the rights for you. But nevertheless, contacting the author and requesting, and an email is sufficient for permission to put something in a dissertation. You don't have to have like a formal contract necessarily, at least in my mind. But you want to be reaching out to people, securing permissions before you get to that last semester and then the final days of trying to submit your thesis or dissertation, and then finding that you can't use the image and you have to white it out or remove it from your dissertation or thesis. So be accumulating permissions as you go along, as you're drafting your document. So hopefully you found this useful. This kind of, because of my background in graphics, this is an area that I feel like I'm pretty well versed in and have dealt with for many, many years. Hopefully you found the background here helpful. If you do have copyright questions, I'm willing to attempt to answer them. Ones that I cannot answer, I'll usually defer to some legal friends to figure it out. But nevertheless, if I can't answer it, I can probably find someone who can. So again, this is Jamie Moeller. This is Grad Connection. Hopefully you found this topic useful. We're probably going to continue with a few more topics. There's at least probably 2 or 3, and I'm just going to take this as it comes. And then after that, I'm not sure where we're going. I'm open to suggestions if you want to drop me a line. But nevertheless, have a great day. Stay safe, stay warm, stay healthy.